fast in class. This is really quite nice. So good evening. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Carolyn Dorsey. I'm part of the business faculty here at University of Maine at Presque Isle. I'd like to welcome you all here tonight and thank you for joining us for our presentation. Before I introduce our speaker, I would like to give you just a little bit of information about our Distinguished Lecture Series. This series began in 1999 in part by a donation that was made by the Libra Foundation, and it was offered so that we could bring a variety of guest speakers that will talk about all sorts of disciplines, points of view, and topics. The speeches are all free, the presentations are open to the public, and we usually have at least 5 or 6 every year. So about every 6 weeks or so, we'll have a guest that comes to join us. So we really appreciate you coming, and we appreciate our guests taking the time to spend the evening with us. So a little bit more about our, whoops, for all those people who I teach speech to, you're not supposed to do that. My paper got stapled. I'm very honored tonight to introduce this evening's presenter, Dr. Elise Perrault. I met via technology and the phone, Dr. Perrault several months ago. She reached out to the university because she was going to be in our area for a year or so, roughly, doing some research. And she is from a university in South Carolina, and she wanted to have some sort of a connection to the campus here. So we had a few conversations, and then when she got to the area, we were able to meet, and I am so pleased that she's here. She has joined us on campus for events like this, but she's also been a guest lecturer in my classroom, and we have plenty of opportunity for her in the spring, including hopefully, again, teaching one of our business-related courses. So a little bit about her professional side. She's an associate professor of the College of Charleston in South Carolina, and she's part of the Department of Management and Marketing. She's also the director of the Think Differently Forum. She's also been a visiting professor for Brown University. Her research and teaching interests include strategy, stakeholder management and activism, corporate governance, social responsibility, and environmental management. If you happen to ever see her resume, she has pages and pages of awards, presentations, different things that she's done, but a few of the most recent are the 2019 Award for Best Paper, 2017 Distinguished Teacher Award, 2016 Distinguished Research Award, and the list does go on and on. She's authored numerous publications, conference proceedings, and presented at various conferences. Tonight's presentation, she'll talk about how individuals can take the lead in or direct their thoughts and outcomes. So without any further ado, please welcome Dr. Elise Perrault.
All right. Thank you, Carolyn. This is an awesome introduction. And thank you everyone for being here. I'm truly thrilled to be here and share this with you. I was looking at the faces. We have all kinds of people from all kinds of professions. We have students, we have people from the community, and I'm really excited to see and to share this research with you. So first things first, I want to put this little caveat in there. This is a new topic for me. So what's exciting at the same time is that we're looking at sort of this cutting edge, digging down into something that's called pain in decision making. And I don't know, you might have been surprised to see those two words together. Why are decision making so painful? These are not words that we usually associate. So the first thing that we're going to talk about tonight is this, is what's that kind of pain? What do we talk about when we say pain in decision making, and why are we pushing through with that? So I should say this before I start, because this is exploratory research and exploratory topics, I'm really looking forward for this interaction with the room. So I'll be asking you questions, and you'll see those slides that have questions out there. I totally want your feedback. I know you're laughing in the back. Oh no, not me. Yes, I totally want your feedback and see if we could come up with that. I'll tell you why. Because when we talk about pain in decision making, I know that we don't explicitly see this topic together. However, I know that also we're all intuitively knowing that decisions are painful, right? Okay, so the fact is we tend to keep this for ourselves. So we go through this process, these uncertainties, and we just kind of make do with it. Sometimes we feel like we're the only ones who experience that. Bottom line is, we usually don't talk to someone, unless it's a really big decision, about this whole process and why we're experiencing pain in the process. That's why tonight is kind of the opportunity for us to do this and learn more about each other in a process that we usually keep kind of quiet. All right, I need to find the clicker and I'll hold on to it. Okay, so let's start with that question. What kind of pain do you experience when making decisions?
Physical.
Physical pain. That's really interesting. I can start with mine just to get the ball rolling and then see what y'all think. I guess in thinking about this question, I thought my pain in making decision is actually having to think about that decision, something I don't want to. When do we have to make decision? Well, my car broke down, now I have to decide, am I gonna replace this expensive transmission or get it fixed or change vehicle? That's something I don't really want to think about, and so that's kind of one type of, it's painful. So those of you who brought up the physical part, like what does that mean? Headache? Is it stomach ache? What kind of pain? Headache? It's working too hard, right? Okay. Other kinds of pain?
Sick your stomach if you're nervous about the decision.
Yes, okay, so you're not sure what the outcome is going to be, so there's that nervousness, the uncertainty, that's painful.
I think there's a pain of loss.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
When you make a decision, it's a trade-off. So one of the options versus the other. When you have to choose, you're choosing that. You're going to miss out on one thing when you choose the other.
Right, excellent, that's true. Other kinds of pains you guys are thinking about? Oh, okay, he's getting something too. That's good. So the main reason why we're experiencing pain, and some of you brought up that head issue thing, is because our brains are essentially not wired to think, or they're wired to not think, if we're going to express that properly grammatically. So the fact is we have developed over time all of these cognitive shortcuts. So when we hear a loud noise, we want to run away. When we feel that little brush of the ankle, we just want to jump and run, right? So these are all kinds of shortcuts that we don't think about. We have a reaction. If somebody says something in a certain tone, or we see a type of facial expression, we see those emotions, we tend to react to these without thinking through the process. So we go from stimulus basically to action, and then we skip all of the thinking part. And this has been super useful for a really long time. So we've reinforced those paths in our brain, and that's what we tend to do. We tend to make all of our decisions on this automatic thing. First of all, it's really efficient, and second, that's just the way our brains are. So it's really easy. It takes the pain away, right? We don't have to feel that pain. So that's how we're wired. Now, the reason why this is not so appropriate nowadays is that we live in a different world. So our environment has changed to the point where we don't need to react so swiftly. It's not the same type of environment as what our ancestors had to go through when these paths evolved. And then the second thing is, obviously, well, our fundamental beliefs, or where that comes from, we've come to accept everything that we hear. Did you notice that? Like, we hear something, we read something, and we automatically think that's true. You're nodding, so you believe me. See? Points made. You hear me? You believe me. There's a trap. Okay, so that's what happens, right? So we just believe things as soon as we hear them. And we generally don't do any research for ourselves. So even tonight, after this convincing talk and everything I will be saying here, we might not look at this any further, and then you'll take away. Hopefully you can believe me. I've done the research, but most of the things that we read, comes from sources that we haven't necessarily looked up for ourselves, or look at the context in which that comes. So we're wired not to think. However, this doesn't really work really well for us nowadays. So let's take a look at the thinking process. That's what it looks like. This was developed by John Dewey about 100 years ago. It came up in 1910, and I think it was significantly revised in 1933. It's still pretty fundamental, and I think we can go with that. It's still effective today. So first of all, something happens. I call this a perplexity or an intellectual trigger. I'll run through an example in a second. For example, we're here having a nice chit chat, and all of a sudden the fire alarm rings. There's a trigger, right? We have to think. Now we have to think about what do, right? We have a decision to make. So we have to inquire. First of all, we'll go through this phase of thinking, what does this alarm mean? Does it mean there is a fire? Is this a false alarm? Is this a test? What is going on? So that's our inquiry phase. So we'll have a suggestion, right? The suggestion that there is a fire is going to be investigated. And then we'll look at all kinds of different suggestions that come in parallel, such as, no, it's a false alarm, no, it's this, or no, it's a test, or somebody smoked in the stairs. All right, so all kinds of things are going to happen here during the inquiry phase. Ultimately, we're going to settle on something, and that's going to become our belief. So we're going to believe this is just a test. Maybe because it happened earlier today. Maybe because we're not seeing smoke, or we're not seeing anybody else alarmed in the building. Or all kinds of cues are going to come up that we're going to pick up, and then we'll decide, all right, we're going to accept as true the fact that we don't have to leave. That'll be our action. We're going to stay here, right? So it's pretty simple. That's how we run through it. As you can imagine, sometimes the inquiry phase is going to be much, much longer if we have, what kind of situations do you think? Where would we inquire for a longer time? What do you think?
Oh, I said one that's not such a big of an emergency.
If it's not an emergency, right, it will take a longer time. So if it's an emergency, we'll have to make a decision more quickly. That makes a lot of sense. And what other kinds of situations could bring us to take more time in the inquiry?
Choosing what you want to do after school.
Yeah, something really complex, like what Kim was saying. Like it's a decision that has a lot of bearing, or it could be that something that is expensive, or it's something that just has a lot of potential consequences, or something that's really severe. So then we'll take more time here. Our beliefs are more likely to be true. But again, the thing is, we end up with a lot of beliefs that are some things that are suggestions we've accepted over the time, and they're not necessarily true. So we have to watch out for that. All right, now I told you earlier that thinking is painful. So this is where the pain is going to come in. 2 pain points. First of all, the painful acceptance is what we come into the trigger that we said earlier. It's an emotion, right? So we have that fire alarm coming. It's an intellectual point in my mind that says, wait a second, I have to do something about this, but it's also emotional. Now I'm getting a little anxious. This is potentially threatening. This is dangerous. I have to do something about that. Now, the fact that we have to think about something is oftentimes what we find is a painful trigger. Like earlier when my car broke down. That's painful. Like now I have to think about this. Oh, I didn't want to. My plan for what I want to do after school, or whatever place I was going today, now it's closed. Oh, what do I do? Right? So whenever things don't go as planned is when we have that painful trigger. So we basically have to realize that we go about in life on automatic, thinking that things are going to happen the way that we expect them to happen on automatic, and then at some point they don't, and then we have to think through alternative scenarios, and that generates a painful trigger. It's a negative emotion. All right, that's our first pain point. The second one happens during the inquiry, and I think that's what most of you were pointing to earlier, is the fact that while I don't know how this is going to resolve, I'm getting a lot of anxiety. So, applying for college, you're not sure if you're going to get in or not. There's a lot of anxiety. As long as things are out of our control, right? So if we're working in a big building, we're thinking about going down or not for this fire alarm, there's anxiety building up. So we get stressed about not knowing what to do during this inquiry phase while we're looking for information. We don't know how it's going to resolve. So during that time, there's this ambiguity, and that's what's painful, is that we just don't know how that's going to resolve, and not knowing creates uncertainty. Uncertainty is unpleasant, right? So we all know about that. Suspense is unpleasant. And the reason why we know that's true is because at the end, once we find our decision, once we take action, we oftentimes feel the relief as well, right? And have you ever heard yourself say, oh, I don't care, now at least it's done, right? So I don't really care which outcome, which decision. I've thought about it so much, now it's done, I'm happy. So this is a relief point. All right, so let's take a second. What does this look like for you in reality? What are some of those situations where you felt or you feel that you can see those, the painful trigger, the painful acceptance, and then the pain of inquiry? When I was bringing up those examples, were there examples that were coming to your mind as well? Yes.
In our organizational behavior class, which a lot of students are here, we talk a lot about how sometimes the right decision isn't obvious, especially when you're managing people and leading people. And so it can be we talk about analysis paralysis and all of those things that cause you to really stress about having to make a decision where there's no obvious right answer.
Right. Very good.
Or no.
Mm-hmm. Correct. So the uncertainty of the outcome as well. That there is probably not even a good answer sometimes. That's possible too. What else?
In the real estate world, buyers have a hard time making a final decision, thinking they're going to miss out on another house. They they get a house under contract, and then they're thinking, oh my God, is this the right house? And they continue to look. They still continue to look when they're under contract.
And isn't that the fact that it's never perfect? We always have to give up something. It's always a compromise, and that's why it's a big purchase. It bears a lot of consequences. We're not sure that's the right answer, and we don't have confirmation. We can't know for sure. So those are some of the elements around the decision-making process that create or that feed the fact that it's painful, is that we will never have certainty. Really good. Anything else? Okay, I'll put that in context. Maybe that'll be a little bit more useful. So in the context of purchasing, we've all been there, right? So we love buying things, I do. So something we have to make a lot of decisions about the things we buy, from little trinkets to big homes, and so there's purchase decisions of all types. Here, this is our thinking process in the black box, just sort of adapted for a purchase. So at first, we have that same trigger. So we have a problem or a desire, we want a new house, or I'm seeing these boots and they look super cute, that's still a trigger. So we have this problem or desire, right? However you want to call it. Then we search for information or not. I don't need to search for more information. I saw the boots, they're good enough. I don't care if they're going to hold up the rain or if they're going to be there in 2 years. I just like them right in the moment. Or if it's a home, in that case, or a vehicle or something else, then we might actually inquire a lot more. We want to see, how the details are. For clothing, I might say, oh, do I need to dry clean this, or is this going to go into my washing machine? However that works out. So we search for this information. Then we look for alternatives, as Stephanie was mentioning. We look to all these homes. We want to see everything on the market. In the case of my boots, I might not look for alternatives. I'm all set. I saw that. I like them. They're coming with me. So we make this decision, and then we feel a certain way after the purchase, right? We like it. We're so happy. I'm going to wear them right this afternoon. Or we're not quite sure. We still wonder, would I have preferred another house? Could I have paid less? Was that the right place? Is there something else that's going to come on the market quickly? How about a vehicle? I chose this. Should I have chosen a pickup for the winter that came early? How is that going to work out? So that post-purchase is important as well. So this is what our process looks like when we apply it to decisions. Okay, now things come up around this to influence us, right? So then we have those ideas around what the product is, the price, the place of promotion. Y'all have been there? Marketing? Okay. Second thing, we have stuff going on in the general environment. So is this a good economic time? What is going on with technology? Which is why I want the next iPhone and the, sorry, I need to stay away from this. You're looking at me. So yeah, what's going on in technology, in the politics, sociocultural, so what are the trends that are going on? We're recycling more, people like all of these organic products, this food, everything else. So we're looking at these things, we like the natural environment, we're looking at these trends as well. And that's all important as we look to our decisions about products. Another really important thing is who we are, right? How do we get into this process? What is our personality? More impulsive, bubbly, or are we strong thinkers, long decision makers? What's our attitude? I'm happy, I'm sad today. This changes a lot of things as well. So when you look at all of this and these factors, that is not an exhaustive list. And we think that all of these things constantly bombard our thinking process, right? So we're looking at this black box, which was earlier, that little white line with the 4 simple steps. And now we see that this is what comes all around it. And this is where a lot of this confusion happens, in the inquiry stage, especially. So we have all of this information to process as we seek to make decisions. And part of it that's not really there, but is how I feel post-purchase, but this how I feel has a lot to do with how I interact with my environment. What are people going to think about me for making this decision, my close environment, but also society as a whole. So we have to think about all these levels and integrate all of that in our decisions. No wonder we get those headaches, right? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this brain-heart-gut connection. So far, we're looking at the thinking process as if it was all happening here. And we've talked a lot about our head and what's going on in our brain. However, we know that, like when I was talking to you about these boots and you saw me like smile intuitively, and you know that comes probably more from my heart area. Like there's something here that's just emotional, it's not something that is rational, I didn't need anything, but now I'm seeing something I like, it comes from the heart. Or there's this house, I really am falling in love with it. Or this vehicle, man, that would look good on me. Okay, so that comes over here. And then there's this gut, right, which is that part here that we've all experienced that says something like, I don't know, right? Or would that ever be good? So there's this other part to the decision that says, well, can you really afford this? Or is that a good move? Or is that gonna, be the good position to take? Should you really get a dog right now while you're in college? So there's a gut feeling here that also tells you, wait a second, like let's think this through, right? And then we bounce around that decision, not only with everything that's processing around us, those elements, but we're bouncing it between heart, gut, brain, and try to make sense of all of these inputs that we're getting at the same time. What's really interesting here is that if you notice, these inputs sometimes are in conflict, right? We want something, then we're not quite sure, we think it through, that puts boundaries on it. These boots are great, I love them, but I didn't work 2 extra days last week, my paycheck was smaller, maybe I should wait. So what do we listen to when that happens? And I guess that's a question for you. Who or what do you listen to when you make decisions? I think it's a self-aware and self-conscious process that we all should do. How do we make decisions, and what is the key thing that will change your mind? I can tell you that at about college age, I realized that I was really influenced by what my mother would think, even though I lived far and far away. I was going to buy this, what I thought was a beautiful glass table with chairs that were covered, and there were different colors available, black, red, and white. And I just thought to myself, well, wouldn't that look good if I bought 2 of those white tan ones and then 2 of the red ones, and then like it was this really contemporary condo. And then I just heard my mother's voice in my head saying, that doesn't make any sense. Or just like, oh, that looks funny. And I just couldn't proceed with that thought, with that purchase. I just kept thinking, what would she say We're like, what is she going to say when she sees this? So I became aware that the who I was listening to made a lot of difference in my decisions. Now, at this stage of life, it's changed. That is not what I'm listening to. I'm listening to different people, my brain, whatever. I know you're waiting to hear, like, how does this evolve? It's not my mother anymore. But I think it's important that we're aware of who or what we are listening to. So I'm kind of curious. What is it for you that helps you make decisions? Yes?
What the consequence, thinking ahead of what the consequence, not being so much in the moment, but
Right.
after.
And what's the decision rule? If the after feels good,
If it would, yeah, if it would not necessarily feel good, but if it would be harmful, if there were to be a consequence that would be detrimental.
Right.
in
then
some
you
way.
want to it. Excellent. Any other thoughts?
With the buying stuff thing, I have waitress, so I'm like, okay, if I want to buy this, pick up a shift, like an extra shift this week, and then we're all
Yes.
set. It's like it never happened.
Right.
Oh, yep, well, there goes that. Good thing I worked today.
Okay, so you balance it out. You're being rational about it. You balance it out. You say, if I can afford it, then I'll get it. You work for it. Okay? Other thoughts? Yep.
I heard you think, do I really need this right now, or do I just want it right now?
Good for you. Good for you to be able to do that. Yes, and sometimes it's difficult. So,
But does then that change your mind? Because I go through that, but then sometimes I just want it and I don't need it and I do it anyway.
Yeah, and I can't afford it.
And she can best both of these. That's true.
but that's true. So then we start playing these tricks, like, okay, if I need it and I don't just want, but then I can convince myself I need it, right? I can do that.
Or you deserve it.
That's right. I just totally deserve that. Okay, so we do play these mind games. What else?
I think it depends on the decision.
Yep.
What it's related to.
Right?
Well, we're gonna listen to her, we're gonna follow my gut, or,
So you have different
yeah.
who or what, okay?
I would say at this point it's pretty much just intuitive. So without art, I think there's too much information out there in today's world with our technology. There's so much information that you could, and so much data, we're really unable to process it. And the more information you have, the more likely you are, actually, the more choices you have, the more likely you are to make the wrong choice. So I just feel like it's important to have some patience, to wait, and to know intuitively, oh, this is it. You know, I wanted it 3 weeks ago, it wasn't quite right for whatever reason, rationally, whatever it is. But sometimes if you wait, all of a sudden you just know, oh, that's it, that's the thing. It's not easy to wait sometimes, but to me, at age 56, that's what seems to be the prevalent criteria.
And sometimes, I just read this book recently that said depending on the market or the item that you're looking for, there is this algorithm or this formula that you're better to spend, say, 10% searching and then 90% enjoying, right? And then if you're later in life, like you would spend less and less time searching. So basically, you know, you can look at it from a kid's perspective. Most of their time, most of the little kids' time is spent exploring, right? And they don't really decide on anything. But then as we grow in life, we spend less and less time exploring and more time enjoying what we have. Now, think about it in the context of, say, bring it way out to late senior life, okay? Do they go and explore out new restaurants and things? No, they tend to capitalize on the one they like and then keep going to that one that they really like instead of exploring different restaurants. But at our age, we'd like to maybe explore a different restaurant all the time. But then at some point in life, that balance shifts all the time. So there's this algorithm that plays in our personality in terms of exploration, exploitation between those two. That's really interesting. But I also want us to notice that sometimes it's a person that we're listening to. Sometimes it's ourselves or elements of ourselves. Sometimes it's what right? Sometimes there are elements of, probably as you mentioned earlier with, oh, if I can afford it, or there's that rationality, it's that what that really kind of breaks the bank. All right, so let me talk to you about principles just for a little bit. So when I was doing this research, I started studying people who were really good at making decisions and people who were really bad. So who are those really good people? I thought, well, really successful people should be really good at making decisions. Obviously, they've made great decisions in life that had awesome outcomes, all right? And the really bad decision makers, well, who would that be? What does that look like? Someone who's bad at making decisions probably gets a number of really bad outcomes. So I actually interviewed someone who was a, I don't know how you call this, a custodian in the federal jail, which was interacting with inmates in the federal prison on a daily basis. And this person was basically having this interaction with those who we would call like bad decision makers. They kept ending in bad outcomes. And then for the good decision makers, I've read a number of books by, especially self-biographies, by people. One that really touched me was Ray Dalio's. I don't know if you know him. He's the founder of Bridgewater, a very successful investment company. So Principles is actually the name of his book, and it's what I thought was some of the most groundbreaking rules out there. I really had to do some convincing on myself to go through the end of this book. So I think that's a really good rule of thumb. So principles, right, are kinds of rules that we impose to ourselves, something really rigid that we say we're going to follow this rule to help us reduce ambiguity. So in the investment world, it would look something like, if the market is up, or if inflation goes up and the price of commodities goes down by so much, then this rule kicks in, right? That's kind of a principle. A principle you brought up earlier, and then I realized I was already making a lot of decisions based on principles. So a principle you brought up earlier is, if I can't afford it, I won't buy it. Okay, that could be a really good principle for decision making. It's quite helpful, right? Some of the principles that we have, like it takes a long time to actually develop them and then to realize that we have principles. Like, which ones are they? At some point, like I really love real estate, I'm really passionate about that. And then a couple of years ago, I came up with this principle for myself, which I realized it's not where you are, it's who you're with. Because I loved buying homes, switching homes, I love that. And then I would just think, oh, but it's not where you are, it's what you live. So it's who you're with. Now that's a principle I developed. Now another principle would be, it doesn't matter what my mother thinks. Just kidding. Based on these previous decisions. But when we come up with these principles, right, it really makes our rules so much better, because then we can go about making decisions without having to live through the same pain over and over again of, should I get this item? Well, then let me go through the first principle. That could be a good one too, the one you brought up earlier. Is the consequence going to be harmful? Or is it going to be a good outcome? Have I waited long enough? Or did I get all the information I needed? Or if I feel uncertain, if I don't feel it, I don't go forward, right? Those are all decision rules. Let's not call them principles. Let's just say little decision rules that we can have, and they really help us to make decisions more swiftly and to eradicate that pain that we have. So, what are some of those principles that you might have? Like, I'm just curious here. I'm really, really digging into your brains to see, are there some more principles that we can think of? Some kind of decision rules that really help you out. Yes?
Meetings to go on clearance in a couple weeks.
Okay. If it's not on clearance, it's not worth it yet.
Yeah.
Decision? Yeah. Good rule.
Pros and cons list, usually.
Pros and cons list. That's a good trick, actually. How do you weigh this out, though? Isn't that so complicated? Like one big pro and then 5 cons. We're going with it. Right? Okay.
Scarcity. If it's something I can't get later or somewhere else, like I'm a sucker for limited time only stuff.
Right. That works. So when you're you're traveling, it's just right here. You're not coming back to this place. I gotta get it now, right?
One-time opportunity.
That's interesting. I think a good principle too is, you know, in thinking of others, I would think that if this is going to make anyone upset, or if someone would not really kind of approve of this, I probably should stay away from that, right? Another decision, I guess some of the decision rules, you might have heard of those in ethics classes, for instance, is, you know, how would you feel, what would you, if your grandmother wouldn't approve of it, just, you know, don't do it. So the grandmother rule. Things like that, right? If it's in the front page of your paper, or it's associated with your name, how do you feel about it? Other kinds of principles you guys have? Maybe something more even specific. Yes?
Would like motivation be one?
What do you mean?
I don't know. I just thought of it.
Oh yeah, that's good. There must be a way to spin that, motivation, and how that can feed into a principle. Yep.
Sometimes when making a purchase decision, I'll wait overnight. I'll give it one overnight,
Yes.
so it's not impulsive and I really think it over a little bit more.
Right. So in one of Ray Dalio's principle was, where does that stand on the list? So that was his principles for life, and he has principles for work. If you care to read the 2 big tomes of his books, they're really interesting. But then there'll also be big principles in there. Some of those principles is whatever you're going to do, or thinking about who we are we society-oriented, or is this going to be self-oriented? So is this basically decision, whatever it is that going to help me, or is that going to help others? And that's another kind of rule that we can decide where we stand on this. Maybe it's both, great. But if it stands more on one side or the other, how do we handle it? All right. If we want to be a little bit more specific about overcoming that pain in making decisions, right? Like we've moved into solutions now, and we're trying to acknowledge there's pain in decision making. We're going to have to first recognize there are, and then we want to try to minimize that uncertainty during the inquiry phase. I was mentioning, and it was in the title of my presentation, that we would use critical thinking. So here I want to spend a little bit more time talking about what critical thinking is and how we can really use that. So those decision rules and principles are really great, but they too serve to bypass the thinking process, right? So we're not asking ourselves to think critically about anything, we're asking ourselves to not think and follow a principle that would work. So yeah, that's a great way to circumvent the pain, is to just not do it at all. But if we want to actually engage and embrace it, so I think first of all we have to look at this attitude of decision making is painful. We know that. Let's accept it and let's embrace it. That means if I'm feeling this pain, I'm just gonna know, instead of feeling the headache, let's look at it as there's an emotion here that I can harness, and that tells me I have to make a choice. And this emotion is also something that invites me to think through where I'm feeling this. Is this in my brain, in my heart, or in my gut? And how to think about this in a way that's beneficial. So using critical thinking is a series of questions. So when we want to think critically, it's interesting because when we use that word critical, it's usually negative, right? We're saying someone is critical, or we're critical of something. A critic is not something that we view positively. Nevertheless, as a society, we try to encourage each other to be critical thinkers, right? So there's a double sense to that word. It's important that we know we want to say here, we want to take those thoughts hostage and examine them. We want to see what these thoughts are saying to us. Where are they pointing us? What are they pointing us to do? So the first thing we said earlier, that we believe a host of things that are not true. So maybe we need to step back and look at what is the belief behind this. So if I hear the fire alarm, there's an intuitive belief that a fire alarm signifies fire, right? Is that true? Is that correct? Probably, right? It's something that we've associated over time. There's a single purpose for the fire alarm. That's great. if my car breaks down, is my belief that the car is totaled correct? Maybe not, right? Maybe we need to reassume that. So all I'm saying is, there's some beliefs that we have that are not necessarily true. The second thing is looking at the source of information that we have. So this is kind of a process. If most of the information that I have, and that's not so uncommon, is from my friends and my family and the people I talk to, then I'm back into this circle of, why am I believing any of this again, right? I have, not that we need to be so skeptical, but what do these sources mean? Is it true that people will get bald if two of their grandfathers on the father's side is? No, that's not true. Houseflies live a day? No, they live, how long, what, 20 years or something like that? You know, but we believe everything we hear, right? We really do. I don't know. Sun chips are good for you? I believe it. Okay, so those kinds of things, you know, that will be put on a package somewhere, and it'll tell you it's all natural or whatever. And you believe it. Okay, so where does that information come from, and is it biased? Does it come from the company? Does it come from the seller, or does it come from this objective party? What are our values in this, right? So that's the hard part, is the values, and does the decision enhance our values position? In ethics theory or in philosophy, there is this virtues ethics. And virtues ethics tells us that we should aim for that good character, for everything that builds us up into being this good person, this good thing. And so sometimes we have to make difficult decisions, but because they lead to this good character, that's something we want to consider. How does it fit with our values? And then lastly, the detachment. Did you notice how sometimes it feels so difficult to make decisions for ourselves? Or you see your friends and they're going in circles about making a decision that you would be like, this is so simple. Like, I just see it. You just need to do this, right? Okay, well then, what would you tell yourself if you were your best friend? And that's a tactic I've used a couple of times now, and I'm just thinking, it actually works. I can't believe it, but it actually works. So you can talk to yourself as if you were this other person. It creates a detachment, the objectivity, and totally saying, like, if somebody was asking me about that, I mean, the answer would be quite simple. So why am I making it difficult for myself? All right, the last thing is looking at the pain, again, is making this pain a friend into decision making and looking at the long term and seeing that when we do that, right, there's a lot of benefits. So there's all kinds of reason to not engage in decision making. It's so much easier to go with our shortcuts. It's so much easier to just not engage in the process, delay it, do all kinds of things, give the decision to someone else. That even is something that we do. But if we can focus on wanting to engage, confront it, then we can really get some of those benefits because we will grow through the process. Meditation, you might be surprised to hear this over here, but something that really helps has been proven to help us think clearly. So as we were saying earlier with that black box and all of these elements around it, there are so many things that bombard us at every level. And so sometimes it's just a matter of clearing this up, listening to your intuition, or finding a way to get that pretty clear for yourself. And how would you feel about it in 5 minutes, in 5 days, in 5 months, or 5 years, right? That helps you be patient, delay. All of those of you who have said sleep overnight, how are you going to feel in 5 minutes, 5 days, 5 years? Give yourself the time to do that. So, quick summary, and then I'll be happy to have conversations with all of you. So, decision making, essential part of the everyday life. We make so many more decisions than we are even aware of. We totally want to bypass it. We love to use our shortcuts. That's what we're wired to do. However, there is this pain point that if we can address them, if we're willing to engage in the pain of decision making, we will be better off. And critical thinking is one way to do that, but these other recipes or things just really are there to help us have this better attitude toward the pains of decision making and then embrace it. So, what do you think about that? How do you view the pain of decision making, and Are you willing to do that? Is that like a Downing lecture? Oh man, that was bad news.
No, I think it'd be a good strategy, so you think about it.
Are you more aware of the fact that you're experiencing that when making decisions? Are you thinking back about some decisions that you want to share with others, and you've seen those pain points and how you've handled those? I'd love to know that, even if it's not with the whole room, but if you just want to share personally, I'd love to.
Well, plazas are coming to Maine, to Georgia, and I was very skeptical of it because like it's a white state, and I was like, okay, and I was like, okay, and I was like thinking about it, I was like, okay, we're full sending, we're sending it. So I just came, and I was like, oh, I don't know, just, you know, I just YOLO'd it. 4 years later, I'm still here, so it's just like, I don't know, just like my decision making is always like, I'm stressed, or like, okay, I'm so stressed, I'm over it now, I'm about to full sending, I don't care what the option is sending, like I just like that. Now I'm taking like my IEP classes for like my special ed kids, and like doing evaluation, like I don't know what's going on, but I'm sending it, I don't know what's going on. If I get it wrong, I mean, you supposed to teach me this, so I just won't send it. I'm like, oh. I stressed out for a whole like week, I'm like, I don't know how to do this, I don't know how to do this. I go through a whole thing and I don't know how to do this. After a while, I'm like, oh, I don't care anymore. Let's send it. I just turn it aside and hope it's like a vision, but.
So you're experiencing that uncertainty pain, right? The inquiry phase. What do I do? Where do I go? And then you've chosen to resolve it by saying, okay, let's do it, right? Okay. What are some other strategies that would be beneficial? That works.
It works for me, everybody.
It's one way to get rid of it, is to take action.
You're mostly second guessing yourself. So you're just like, I should make my first instinct. The first instinct is always the best instinct sometimes. So I'm like, and I'm good at what I do, but I always doubt myself. So I'm like, oh, that's stupid. And I'm like, oh, you're so stupid. And I go over, you're stupid, you're stupid, you're stupid. And I'm like, oh well. And it just like, I'll be a bitch. Just shopping, like what Soap said, like, I go shopping, I was surfing all summer, and I bought a cute little like blouse, kind of sweater thing to wear for here. And I was like, oh, that's cute. And it's like $3. But I was like, but what I needed this summer, but I'm going to Maine for winter, so I'm gonna need it. So I'm like, I can do this. I bought a whole bunch of like winter stuff, but I didn't need it at the time, but I needed it now. And I was like, I work a whole day for 3 weeks straight. I got the money. I'm about to go shop and get food at the same time. That's life. So.
You can justify that you need it, see?
It's easy sending it. Once you send it, you will just send it.
Makes sense. Yep.
I think that like as we grow up from like kids, we're not very cautious about the decisions that we make. We just think on the spot. But as for me, as I've grown up, like I've become very cautious about everything that I do, because I think of long term and how it's going to affect me and the people around me. So I just think that's important.
So does that make decisions difficult, more difficult to make?
Yes.
How do you handle that?
I don't.
Right. I'm glad you were here tonight. Hopefully you picked up a couple tricks. Yep.
I love that you talked about embracing the process. I think that's so important in every aspect of your life. I wish when I were in my 20s or in college, somebody had just said to me, you know what? It's okay not to know.
Right.
Yeah.
We can't always know everything. It's okay to embrace that moment of not knowing, accept it, chill out. From that place, you have choices. You can respond. We can always respond. We can't always take action in every situation. We can respond, but we can't always take action. So just saying, you know what, I don't know, and that's okay. I think as a younger person, though, you definitely feel a lot of pressure to have your game on, better get it right, you need to get this, you need to figure this out, you know, parents, society, job, what are you going to do? It's unknowable, so much of it. So I think if you just chill out a little bit and say, it's okay, you're not an idiot for not knowing the answer to every question. You're very, very far from that. That's wisdom, actually, to just say, I don't know that strength, embrace it, as she said. This is fabulous stuff.
sounds great. You know, one of the really good piece of advice I had, and it was a little bit later than college, but it's really worth it to hear while you're in college, is when you're looking at all these decisions you mentioned earlier, what you're going to do for the rest of your life, right, and the complexity of those decisions. Someone said to me, look at the people who are where, like, what are you attracted, where are you attracted to being? Like, look at the people who have made it to where you want to be, and then go backwards and look at how did they get there. What kind of degree they have, where do they live, what kind of support they had to get there. And if there's anything realistic that you can follow to get to this path, that's the way to go. And it's one step at a time, and you can just find new things along the way. You might not end up where this person did, but there's, at least you're following a similar path. And I thought that was so helpful. In fact, this happened to me during my MBA, and there was this leadership professor that we had during a seminar, an intensive seminar, and she was really a life changer. She was a game changer for everyone in the room. And I thought, how great that she's doing this work that is so inspiring for people, that she's bringing reality and so many components into their lives. And I thought, wow, if I could ever do that, right? And now I'm thinking, oh gosh, I'm gonna need a PhD. I'm gonna need to do all this stuff. But it's helpful, and who knows where that leads. But then it's actually kind of great. So if you want to be the next president, look at how to get there. Well, maybe not the best example. All right.
The gentleman in the back hit it. A lot of people operate on the fear factor.
Yes.
It's fear factor a lot.
They make decisions based on fear. That is so true. That is so true. Fear of losing, right? Fear of not having what we wanted, so we settle for less. Fear of what have you. True. Well, I can put this on mute or power it off, and if you want to continue this discussion offline, well, I'll be here. If you need to go and have to go, I'll be happy to do that. It was lovely to meet you all, and thank you for coming tonight. Much appreciated. Thank you for having me, LP. Really appreciate it.
Dr. Perrault is joined by her two sons, Alex and Andrew. So, there you go. So, thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, I'm so glad you're here.